has always known how to polish its legends. Every explosion looks controlled, every fall appears rehearsed, and every brush with danger feels like a carefully orchestrated illusion crafted by masters of their craft. But behind the glamour, behind the perfect takes and choreographed chaos, lies a truth the industry rarely allows the world to see. Because sometimes the danger isn't cinematic. Sometimes the illusion breaks, and what's left is real tragedy. These are the films audiences celebrate for their adrenaline, their spectacle, their breathtaking stunts, and impossible visuals. But beneath the surface of these action classics is a shadow that never fades. The lives lost in the pursuit of bringing these stories to life. In many cases, the headlines were softened, the details were blurred. Some deaths were mentioned briefly in local papers and then buried under studio pressure. Others were whispered within the industry but never allowed to reach the public in their full, devastating form. And yet the films were released. They became hits. They were played on TV, rewatched on streaming platforms, and praised for their intensity, all while carrying ghosts within their frames. This episode pulls back that velvet curtain to reveal the truth behind 15 action films that witnessed real deaths on set. Not stunts gone wrong, not special effects mishaps, but genuine tragedies, moments when reality shattered the illusion and left a permanent mark on everyone involved. Some of the victims were stunt performers pushing the limits of human physicality. Others were pilots, camera operators, technicians, and supporting actors whose names rarely appear in the credits, but whose contributions were essential. Their stories deserve to be told. Their memories deserve to be honored. Tonight, we revisit the films that hid a darker reality behind their most iconic scenes and unveil the cost of creating Hollywood's most thrilling moments. Fact 1. The Crow. 1994. The set of The Crow was meant to be a celebration of rising star Brandon Lee, his first major lead role, his breakthrough moment, the film that would finally lift him out of the shadow of his legendary father, Bruce Lee. But the production unfolded like a slow-moving tragedy, riddled with warning signs that no one recognized until it was too late. Cost-cutting had quietly seeped into every department. Prop guns were reused when they should have been replaced. Safety teams were stretched thin. And on a cold night in Wilmington, North Carolina, the combination of negligence and misplaced confidence created one of Hollywood's most infamous on-set deaths. The scene seems simple. Eric Draven, played by Lee, enters his apartment and is shot by a thug. It was a moment the crew had rehearsed endlessly. A prop revolver was loaded with dummy rounds, or at least that's what everyone believed. What no one realized was that a fragment of a real bullet remained lodged in the chamber from a previous setup, the result of a rushed attempt to create realistic-looking ammunition on camera. When the blank was fired during the take, the pressure propelled the fragment forward with the full force of a live round. It struck Brandon Lee in the abdomen. He collapsed instantly, and for several seconds, the crew believed he was acting. The horror only became clear when he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't respond. He was rushed to the hospital, but after hours of desperate surgery, he was pronounced dead. He was 28 years old. The studio moved swiftly to minimize the fallout. Public statements framed the incident as a freak accident. Many key details, the cut corners, the improper ammunition procedures, the lack of a weapons specialist were softened or buried in internal reports. And yet the final film was released, celebrated for its gothic artistry, its haunting atmosphere, and its lead actor, whose performance now carries an unintentional, unforgettable weight. Brandon Lee's last moments remain frozen on a reel that Hollywood has locked away. But the shadow of his death lingers over every viewing of The Crow, a reminder that sometimes the price of cinematic beauty is unbearably real. Fact 2. The Dark Knight, 2008. The Dark Knight is remembered for its towering performances, its gritty realism, and its revolutionary approach to modern action filmmaking. But behind the Oscar-winning legacy lies a tragedy that Warner Brothers never highlighted, and many viewers never knew existed. During the intense production of the film's vehicular action sequences, the crew pushed the boundaries of practical effects, creating real crashes and stunts that would define the film's chaotic energy. However, that pursuit of authenticity came with a devastating cost. Conway Wycliffe, a seasoned camera operator and stunt technician, was part of the team responsible for filming the iconic chase sequences involving the Batmobile and the Joker's truck. On the day of the accident, the crew was rehearsing a high-speed stunt at an outdoor facility in Surrey, England. The setup required Wycliffe to film from inside a specially rigged truck as it performed a tight turn at considerable speed. Despite the crew's routine safety checks, something went horribly wrong. The vehicle missed its designated turn radius by inches, colliding with a nearby tree. Wycliffe, positioned at the side of the vehicle to capture the shot, died instantly. What followed was a carefully managed release of information. Warner Brothers expressed condolences, but provided few details, choosing words that framed the incident as an unforeseeable mishap. The production continued shortly afterward, as the immense pressure of the film's schedule left little room for pause. Crew members later described a haunting silence that settled over the set, a stark reminder that even the most elite teams working on the industry's biggest films are never fully insulated from danger. Wycliffe's death added an invisible shadow to the Dark Knight's legacy. His contributions helped shape some of the most memorable action scenes of the decade, but his name appears in the credits only briefly, unnoticed by most viewers. For those who worked alongside him, the tragedy remains a reminder that behind even the most polished cinematic masterpieces lies real human risk, and sometimes a life lost in the pursuit of a perfect shot. Fact 1. Top Gun, 1986. Top Gun became a cultural phenomenon, a film that turned Tom Cruise into a superstar, redefined aerial action cinema, and inspired generations of pilots. But what the world didn't see was the profound tragedy that unfolded during its production, one that the studio quietly pushed into the background while the film soared to blockbuster status. Behind the adrenaline of fighter jets ripping through the sky was a dangerous reality. Real aircraft, real stunts, and real risk. And for one man, that risk proved fatal. Art Scholl was a highly respected pilot, aerial coordinator, and camera operator, celebrated throughout Hollywood for his unmatched skill in capturing breathtaking airborne footage. When the Top Gun team needed impossible angles and dramatic in-flight shots, Scholl was the first person they called. On the 16th of September 1985, he was performing a complex inverted spin maneuver off the coast of Southern California, a move designed to give the film its signature high-energy realism. The plan was routine for a pilot of Scholl's caliber, but something went catastrophically wrong. While executing the maneuver, Scholl radioed in with a calm but chilling message. "I have a problem. I have a real problem." Seconds later, his Pitts S2 camera plane spiraled out of control and plunged into the Pacific Ocean. Neither the aircraft nor his body was ever recovered. The mystery of what caused the crash has never been fully resolved. Mechanical failure, sudden loss of control, or an unforeseen aerodynamic issue. Without wreckage, there were no answers. Paramount's response was brief. The tragedy received minimal press coverage, overshadowed by the film's growing hype. As Top Gun became a global hit, Scholl's death was mentioned rarely, if ever, in promotional materials. His final footage was lost with him, swallowed by the ocean. Yet his legacy lives on in every soaring frame of the film. The realism audiences admired the intense flight sequences. The visceral aerial energy came from Scholl's dedication, his craft, and ultimately, his sacrifice. Behind the triumphant roar of jet engines lies the haunting truth that one of Hollywood's most iconic action films cost a man his life. Fact 4. The Expendables 22012. A franchise built on explosions, gunfights, and nostalgia-soaked action heroes. The Expendables 2 promised bigger stunts, louder firepower, and a scale that would dwarf the first film. But behind the curtain of adrenaline and Hollywood spectacle, one tragedy marked the production in a way the studio rarely acknowledged publicly. The film's trademark intensity, practical explosions, real weaponry, and high-risk set pieces created an environment where even the most experienced stunt teams devastating incident occurred during the filming of an explosive action sequence on a lake in Bulgaria. The stunt involved a large pyrotechnic detonation tied to a boat, timed precisely with camera setups positioned at multiple angles. But something went catastrophically wrong. During the blast, the explosion triggered prematurely and with far greater force than calculated. Two stuntmen, Kun Liu and Nuo Sun, were caught in the blast radius. Liu was killed instantly. Sun was critically injured but survived after extensive medical treatment. What followed was a familiar Hollywood pattern, a brief statement, carefully worded, distancing the core production team from responsibility. The focus shifted back to the movie's ensemble cast and its high-octane excitement. Internally, however, crew members spoke about miscommunications between the pyrotechnics team and the second unit directors, rushed scheduling, and pressure to push the stunts beyond safe limits. These conversations never made it to the press. By the time the movie premiered, the marketing narrative buried the tragedy beneath the star-studded cast and explosive action scenes. Yet for those who were there, the memory of that day endured. The lake, the smoke, the sudden silence after the blast, it all became a reminder that even in modern Hollywood, where safety protocols are meticulously codified, one miscalculation can have irreversible consequences. The film may celebrate indestructible heroes, but its production told a darker truth. Real lives are far more fragile. Fact 5. The Twilight Zone. The movie. 1983. Few on-set tragedies in Hollywood history are as infamous or as fiercely debated as the catastrophic accident that occurred during the filming of The Twilight Zone, the movie. Directed by 4 high-profile filmmakers, the anthology film aimed to bring new life to the eerie philosophical stories of the classic TV series. But during the production of the segment directed by John Landis, a chain of reckless decisions, ignored warnings, and escalating ambition led to one of the most horrifying incidents ever captured on a film set. The sequence required actor Vic Morrow and 2 child performers Micah Dinla 7 and Renee Shin Yi Chen 6 to escape a village under heavy attack, including explosions and a low-flying helicopter. Crew members had raised concerns about the proximity of pyrotechnics to the aircraft and the complexity of coordinating the helicopter's path with the blasts. Despite the warnings, Landis demanded the effects be bigger and closer, pushing for a level of spectacle that violated both safety standards and child labor laws. During the take, a pyrotechnic blast detonated directly beneath the helicopter, damaging its rotor blades. The aircraft spiraled out of control, crashing into the actors below. Morrow and the 2 children were killed instantly. The incident sent shockwaves through Hollywood and triggered a criminal trial the first time a director had been charged with manslaughter for an on-set death. Despite extensive evidence of negligence, Landis and the crew members were ultimately acquitted. Studios and news outlets minimized the broadcast details, framing the tragedy as a tragic fluke rather than a preventable disaster. Years later, many of those involved still refused to discuss the event publicly. The footage of the accident was locked away, never to be screened again. For the audience, The Twilight Zone, the movie, became just another anthology film. But for Hollywood, it stood as a chilling reminder of what can happen when ambition overrides responsibility, and when the camera keeps rolling long after safety has stopped. Fact 6. Furious 7, 2015. While the death of Paul Walker dominated headlines during the production of Furious 7, another fatal incident connected to the film went almost entirely unnoticed, overshadowed by the scale of the tragedy surrounding the franchise's beloved star. But behind the scenes, far from the glare of global media, a crew member named Carlos De La Torre lost his life in an accident that received barely a whisper compared to the public grieving for Walker. De La Torre was a veteran transportation worker involved in the logistics of moving equipment and coordinating vehicles for the film's numerous car-centric sequences. His job was essential, ensuring that vehicles, rigs, and heavy machinery arrived safely and on schedule. During a transport operation in early 2014, De La Torre was involved in a crash in Atlanta that left him with severe injuries. Despite emergency response efforts, He died shortly afterward. Unlike Walker's death, which halted production, reshaped the film's entire narrative, and became a global news story, De La Torre's passing was mentioned only in quiet internal memos and brief acknowledgments on social media by those who knew him. Universal Studios offered condolences but released no detailed statement. The tragedy was overshadowed not by negligence or scandal, but by the sheer magnitude of the events surrounding Walker's accident. It became, in effect, a death Hollywood forgot. Crew members later reflected on the emotional toll. The sense that De La Torre's work, crucial yet invisible, deserved greater recognition. While audiences marveled at the film's stunts and emotional farewell to Walker, few knew that another life had been lost during its creation. In a franchise built on speed, spectacle, and family, the quiet tragedy of Carlos De La Torre reminds us how many unsung individuals risk their safety behind the scenes, and how easily their stories are swallowed by the noise of blockbuster filmmaking. Fact 7. Deadpool 22018. The Deadpool franchise is known for its irreverent humor, its glossy hyperviolence, and its comic book absurdity, but on the set of Deadpool 2, reality cut far deeper than fiction ever could. Joy S.J. Harris, a professional motorcycle racer and the first African-American woman licensed to compete in sanctioned road racing events, had been hired as a stunt performer for the film. It was her first movie job, brought on to double for actress Zazie Beetz as the luck-bending mercenary Domino. But her transition from competitive racing to film stunt work came with risks that weren't fully understood, respected, or managed by the production. On the 14th of August 2017, Harris was performing a high-speed motorcycle stunt inside downtown Vancouver. According to multiple crew reports, she had expressed concerns about the stunt setup and the lack of adequate rehearsal time. Still, the schedule pushed forward. The scene required her to ride a Ducati through the city streets, accelerate up a ramp, and drive out of frame. But during the take, the bike accelerated faster than intended. Harris lost control, struck a curb, and was thrown through the window of a nearby building. She was killed instantly. In the aftermath, 20th Century Fox issued a carefully crafted statement expressing condolences. But the deeper issues, the rushed schedule, the insufficient stunt training, the pressure to complete a difficult maneuver without protective gear to match the character's costume, were never fully acknowledged publicly. Several crew members later described a tense, somber atmosphere on set, with some expressing guilt and frustration that warnings had gone unheeded. Joy Harris's death sparked industry-wide discussions about diversity hires, safety standards, and the responsibilities of major studios when bringing first-time stunt performers into high-risk environments. Yet mainstream audiences, swept up in the film's comedic bravado and box office success, rarely heard her name. Her legacy lives not in the film itself, but in the conversations it forced Hollywood to confront conversations that, for too long, had been buried beneath studio silence and relentless production demands. Fact 8. The Matrix. Reloaded. 2003. Behind The Matrix, Reloaded's glossy digital architecture and balletic fight choreography was a production environment of staggering complexity. The Wachowskis' vision for the sequel demanded elaborate sets, massive freeway constructions, and some of the most ambitious action sequences attempted at the time. Amid this sprawling maze of stunt work and visual effects innovation, the death of a crew member slipped quietly into the margins, rarely discussed, scarcely reported, and overshadowed by the film's monumental scale. The victim was a veteran technician working in the special effects department, responsible for rigging equipment essential to the film's intricate action shots. During a setup at the Alameda Naval Air Station, one of the film's primary shooting locations, he fell from a height while preparing rigging structures. Despite immediate medical attention, he died from his injuries. The studio confirmed the death, but released almost no details, calling it a workplace accident and leaving the specifics deliberately vague. What many outside the industry never realized was the immense stress placed on crew during productions of this magnitude. Long hours, overlapping departments, and massive logistical pressure created an environment ripe for fatigue-related errors. The Wachowski's ambitious vision required synchronized collaboration across dozens of technical teams, and the sheer pace of production left little room for hesitation or missteps. Within that environment, the technician's death became a tragic reminder of how the least visible workers, the ones who build the worlds audiences marvel at, often shoulder the greatest risks without recognition. As The Matrix Reloaded smashed box office records, the tragedy faded into obscurity, remembered only by those who worked alongside the fallen crew member. Their grief never reached the public eye. Hollywood's machine rolled forward, and the film's legacy became one of spectacle and innovation. But beneath the neon glow of The Matrix lies a truth the franchise never advertised. A human life was lost constructing its illusions. Back 9. Troy, 2004. Troy was designed to be a sweeping historical epic. Massive sets, thousands of extras, and brutal hand-to-hand combat scenes meant to recreate the chaos of ancient warfare. Yet behind the grandeur of Homeric drama, the film's physical demands pushed performers and stunt workers into dangerous territory. Among them was George Camilleri, an experienced stuntman who tragically became one of the film's casualties. A death quietly noted in Maltese newspapers, but rarely acknowledged in Hollywood circles. During the filming on the island of Malta, Camilleri was performing a routine combat stunt. The sequence required extras and stunt performers to charge across uneven terrain while simulating a chaotic battlefield. Camilleri fell awkwardly during one of the takes, suffering a broken leg. Initially, the injury seemed manageable, painful, but far from life-threatening. But complications arose when he was taken to the hospital for surgery. Blood clots formed, leading to a fatal embolism shortly after the procedure. Warner Brothers issued a short statement expressing condolences, but the incident was overshadowed almost immediately by discussions about Brad Pitt's on-set injuries and production delays caused by weather. The narrative that reached the public focused on budgets, schedules, and star power, not on the man who had died while helping construct the massive battle sequences the film relied upon. Camilleri's death served as a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in large-scale action filmmaking, particularly those involving hundreds of bodies moving in unpredictable patterns. Stunt performers walk a thin line between illusion and danger. And in sprawling productions like Troy, one misstep can lead to irreversible consequences. His contribution to the film is visible only in fleeting moments, blurred in action, lost in the sweeping camera pans, but behind those frames lies a life dedicated to bringing cinema's grand illusions to life, and ultimately, the life the film took away. Fact 10. The Exorcist, 1973. Though The Exorcist is remembered as one of the most terrifying films ever made, much of its unease comes from real-life events that haunted the production long before audiences felt its dread. The film's aura of cursed energy has been sensationalized over the years, but beneath the superstition lies a quieter, more human truth. Several deaths occurred during production, some directly connected to the crew, others tied to the film's grueling working conditions. These losses were never highlighted by Warner Brothers. In fact, many were barely mentioned at all. But for those who lived through the shoot, they cast an inescapable shadow. Most widely known is the death of Jack McGarren, who played Burke Dennings. Although he died from complications related to influenza shortly after completing his scenes, the timing created the impression of a production plagued by tragedy. But the lesser-known story involves crew members who died during filming, workers who endured freezing sets, long hours, and physically taxing conditions. One such case was a night watchman assigned to keep an eye on the production's equipment. He died unexpectedly during filming, with details kept vague, and local reports offering only basic information. Another crew member, a special effects technician, passed away under similarly quiet circumstances. Then there was the fire. In one of the film's most infamous incidents, the entire interior set of the McNeil house burned down except for Regan's bedroom, while no one died in the blaze. The fire directly contributed to the grueling conditions the crew endured afterward. Rushed rebuilds, new hazards, and an atmosphere of exhaustion that affected everyone on set. Several crew deaths came in the weeks following the large-scale production pushing human beings to their limits, with some never making it to the other side. The film's impact on horror cinema is undeniable, but hidden beneath its legacy is the quiet toll it took on the people who helped bring its darkness to life. Fact 11. First Blood Part 2. 1985. Few action franchise embody explosive spectacle quite like Rambo. The second film took that spectacle to extremes, transforming John Rambo into a near-mythic figure of destruction. A one-man army navigating jungles, fire, and war machines. But the relentless pursuit of authenticity, combined with the demands of 1,980 seconds action filmmaking, created a dangerous environment where even the most routine explosions carried deadly risk. One stuntman paid the ultimate price in the chaos. A tragedy the studio quietly folded into the background noise of the film's aggressive production schedule. During an effects-heavy sequence in the jungles of Mexico standing in for Vietnam, a massive pyrotechnics setup was wired to create a jungle blast zone, complete with falling debris, fire bursts, and collapsing structures. The stunt performer involved was tasked with hitting a mark just seconds before detonation, but something in the calculations went wrong. The explosion ignited earlier than scheduled, and with far more intensity than reportedly planned. The blast engulfed the performer, inflicting catastrophic burns and trauma. He survived the initial explosion but succumbed to his injuries shortly afterward. No major news outlet ran the story. There was no studio press release specifying the circumstances. Cast interviews never mentioned it. The tragedy became a rumor circulating quietly among crew members, overshadowed by the film's increasing hype and blockbuster marketing. Only much later did stunt community insiders describe the hazards that had plagued the production. Rushed setups, heat exhaustion, limited rehearsal windows, and pyrotechnics far more aggressive than the norms of the era. While Rambo First Blood Part 2 became a commercial juggernaut, cementing Rambo as an action icon, the stuntman's death revealed the darker cost of the film's ambition. Every explosion the audience cheered came from real danger, real fire, real heat. In an era before strict digital enhancements, action films relied on human bodies to absorb the risks. This performer's death became one more untold story in a genre built on physical sacrifice. A sacrifice that, in this case, Hollywood chose not to acknowledge publicly. Fact 12. Transformers, Dark of the Moon, 2011. Blockbuster filmmaking had evolved dramatically by the time Transformers, Dark of the Moon rolled into production. Yet despite advances in digital effects and safety protocols, the film became the site of one of the most shocking and preventable on-set tragedies of modern Hollywood. Gabriela Cedillo, a 4-year-old extra hired to participate in a large-scale freeway sequence, suffered fatal injuries in a stunt gone disastrously wrong. Her death was the result of a mechanical failure, questionable safety practices, and a level of negligence that became a center of heated legal battles. The scene was staged on a closed stretch of highway in Indiana. Cars driven by extras were meant to pass near a stunt involving large-scale explosions and cable-controlled vehicles. One of these cables, a thick steel line designed to pull a stunt car, snapped under extreme tension. The recoiling cable shot across the freeway like a metal whip and sliced through Cedillo's vehicle, striking her in the head with immense force. The injury was catastrophic. Cedillo was rushed to the hospital but suffered severe brain trauma. She was taken off life support the following day. In the aftermath, questions arose about why an extra was allowed so close to an active stunt zone, why the cable had not been shielded, and why safety barriers were inadequate for a sequence involving massive tension loads. Paramount released condolences but attempted to portray the event as a freak occurrence rather than the result of preventable oversight. Cedillo's family sued, ultimately reaching a settlement, but that settlement required confidentiality, once again pushing the tragedy out of public view. The final film includes elaborate freeway destruction scenes, though none from the day of the accident. Audiences marveled at the visual bombast without realizing the cost behind one of cinema's loudest franchises. Cedillo's death remains a chilling example of how even the most technologically advanced productions can fail to protect the most vulnerable people on set, and how easily their stories disappear beneath millions of dollars of CGI, es spectacle. Fact 13. The Patriot, 2000. The Patriot set out to portray the brutality and chaos of the American Revolution with sweeping battlefields, galloping horses, and a scale rarely attempted in historical epics of its era. Yet behind the disciplined formations and choreographed warfare lay a production environment fraught with unpredictable danger, especially for the stunt teams responsible for bringing the film's large-scale combat to life. Among them was a stunt performer whose death was quietly absorbed into the film's production history, mentioned briefly in local reports, but never publicly acknowledged by the studio in any meaningful way. The tragedy occurred during a mounted stunt sequence, one of the film's signature elements. Dozens of horses and riders surged across uneven terrain, recreating the chaos of 18th century warfare. The performer, a seasoned rider, was part of a charge requiring precise timing and coordination. But horses, no matter how well trained, are never fully predictable. During one of the takes, his mount stumbled, either from a hidden divot in the ground or from a sudden shift in footing. The fall was violent, crushing the performer beneath the horse's weight. He was rushed to a nearby medical facility, but the internal injuries were too severe. He died shortly afterward. Sony Pictures issued a short statement, a few sentences of condolences, with the details kept intentionally vague. Publicity for the film continued untouched, focusing on Mel Gibson's performance, the large-scale battle scenes, and the emotional core of the story. Within Hollywood, whispers circulated about the production's demanding pace, the hazardous conditions of multi-horse sequences, and the inherent risks of large battlefield recreations. But these conversations never reached the mainstream. The performer's death became one more unspoken cost of creating cinematic spectacle. His contribution is impossible to pinpoint on screen, lost amid crowds of soldiers, riders, and smoke. But the film's sweeping realism came from the dedication of people like him, whose names rarely appear in headlines, yet whose sacrifices shape the very images audiences celebrate. Fact 14. The Delta Force, 1986. A Chuck Norris-led action film built on military bravado, hijack plots, and relentless explosions. The Delta Force embraced the excess of the 1,980 seconds action landscape. But while the movie projected a sense of invincible heroism, its production unfolded under conditions far more volatile than audiences ever realized. Shot extensively in Israel, the film relied on real pyrotechnics, large-scale detonations, and practical effects executed under intense desert heat, a combination that created a perfect storm of risk. During one of the film's explosive set pieces involving a convoy under attack, a miscalculated blast detonated earlier than planned. The explosion tore through a cluster of crew members positioned behind a ridge, leaving 2 dead and several others injured. The accident happened so quickly that many on set didn't realize what had occurred until after the dust cleared and the screens began. The production company released only the most minimal information, referring to the event as a tragic accident. Local authorities investigated, but the reports were never publicized internationally. The deaths received little press outside Israel, and within the American promotional campaign, the incident was erased entirely. Cast interviews, press junkets, and behind-the-scenes specials made no mention of the tragedy. Insiders later described the production pushing aggressively toward deadlines, with pyrotechnic teams operating under immense pressure to deliver ever larger explosions for the camera. Safety distances were shortened, and protective barriers were considered impractical for many setups. The film's gritty realism, its chaotic war zone aesthetic, came from real fire, real heat, and real danger. Danger that ultimately claimed 2 lives. While the Delta Force was marketed as a gritty, patriotic action thriller, the reality behind its production was far more somber. Beneath the film's swaggering exterior lay a grim truth. The spectacle audiences enjoyed came at a cost, paid by people whose names never made the credits, whose stories never reached the public, and whose deaths were quietly swept aside in Hollywood's relentless march forward. Fact 15. Gone in 60 seconds, 1,974. The original Gone in 60 Seconds is remembered for its raw, unfiltered automotive chaos. soften the danger. Its legendary 40-minute car chase became a cult classic, with director, star H.B. Halicki performing most of the stunts himself. But Halicki's passion for high-risk spectacle eventually led to the tragedy that ended not just a production, but an entire career, a fatal accident that occurred while filming an unrealized sequel. In 1989, Halicki assembled a team in Los Angeles to shoot Gone in 60 Seconds 2, a project meant to surpass the original with even bigger stunts and more destructive set pieces. One of the film's planned sequences involved toppling a 160-foot water tower using carefully rigged cables and explosive charges. The stunt was meant to be dramatic but controlled, collapsing the tower in a predetermined direction while Halicki drove through the shot in a custom-built stunt car. But when the cables were pulled, something went catastrophically wrong. A supporting steel cable snapped under the tension of the collapsing structure. The recoil was explosive. The cable whipped across the set and struck Halicki with massive force. The impact was fatal. He died before reaching the hospital. The production shut down immediately. All footage was locked away. The sequel was abandoned, leaving only early test shots and concept materials behind. Media coverage was limited, overshadowed by other industry news. Halicki's death became a footnote in Hollywood history, shocking to those who followed his work, unknown to most mainstream audiences. The irony is brutal. The man who had built his career on crafting some of the most daring car stunts ever filmed died not behind the wheel, but from a rigging malfunction. His original film remains a cult classic, but the public rarely knows that its spiritual successor cost its creator his life. Hidden behind the roar of engines and the crash of metal is a story Hollywood never retold. A story of ambition, risk, and a tragic finale that ended in silence. Bonus fact: Hollywood's quiet crisis. The hidden toll of stunt work. Long before CGI softened the blows and digital doubles replaced flesh and blood performers, Hollywood action filmmaking relied almost entirely on human bodies. Bodies asked to fall from impossible heights, navigate collapsing sets, run through fire, and crash vehicles at speeds no sane person would attempt off camera. Yet despite the spectacle they created, the stunt community has long existed in Hollywood's shadows, largely invisible to the public and often unprotected by the industry that depends on them. For decades, stunt performers warned that safety protocols varied wildly between productions. Some sets were run with near-military precision, while others operated under relentless time pressure, budget concerns, and a culture of just get the shot. Fatigue became a constant enemy. 12 to 16-hour days were common. Rehearsal time was often cut short, and behind closed doors, performers whispered about close calls, near misses, and colleagues who didn't survive. One of the biggest secrets Hollywood avoids discussing openly is the sheer number of on-set injuries and fatalities that never make the news. In some cases, victims were contract workers whose deaths weren't formally tied to the production. In others, non-disclosure agreements sealed the details. Studios feared headlines that might jeopardize release dates or box office performance. Publicists worked overtime to minimize narratives that suggested negligence. And when accidents did surface, stories were typically reframed as tragic flukes rather than the predictable outcome of systemic issues. It wasn't until the late 1990s and early 2000s that pressure from stunt unions and safety advocates forced the industry to confront its long-standing problems. High-profile tragedies, some from the films in this very list, created momentum for stronger protocols, better oversight, and modernized safety equipment. Today, stunt work remains dangerous, but the safeguards are more consistent, and voices within the stunt community are finally being heard. Yet the ghosts of the past linger. Behind every iconic action sequence from Hollywood's golden decades lies a lineage of unseen sacrifices. Men and women who risked everything for moments of cinematic magic, often without recognition, often without applause, and sometimes without surviving to see the final cut. Their legacy is woven into the fabric of action filmmaking, a silent testament to the cost of illusion. Behind every explosion, every chase, the velvet curtain to reveal just a fraction of the truth hidden behind Hollywood's most thrilling action films. If you want more untold histories, more secret chapters, and more shadows behind the spotlight, make sure you stay with us. Like the video, share it with someone who loves cinema as much as you do, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another journey into the parts of Hollywood the industry hopes you'll overlook. There are countless stories left in the archives, and we're just getting started.